I felt like that there was a time where we started hearing a lot about comedy needing to speak truth to power,
Yeah.
truth to power, truth to power, and it got me wondering, when did things change from just speaking the truth?
Yes.
And it seems like one of the things about the truth is that it could be a messy business.
Hello, my name is Anne McElhenney.
And my name is Phil McAleer.
Took him a little minute there.
Yes.
We've been travelling
We've been travelling.
a lot.
That's an interesting, a good segue. This is welcome to the Anna Film Scoop. Yes, we have been travelling. What a week we've had, as they say.
Yes. Where
Yes,
were we, Philip?
We were in Auburn, New York. What is Auburn, New York famous for? Hands on the buzzers, fingers on the buzzers. Do people know what that means, fingers on the buzzer? Anyway, fingers on the buzzers. Auburn, New York. What's it famous for? Home of
Harriet Tubman,
Harriet Tubman.
number one. Also,
Mr. Seward.
Mr. Seward.
Of
Yeah,
Seward,
by the way,
Seward's Folly.
by the way, for a very small town, famous for a lot of things, and also famous for, look at this photograph, Hunter's Dinerant.
Yes.
Hunter's Dinerant, by the way, is what it's officially called, which is a restaurant in Auburn, New York, which is what film? Who owned it?
Joe Hunter owned it, who is Hunter Biden's grandfather. Therefore, and his namesake, Hunter, obviously, they did what Protestants do, actually. They give their son their grandfather's surname. The Protestants in Northern Ireland do that.
And after Auburn, we were in New York, by the way.
Can I just say a couple of other things?
One
about
more
Auburn?
thing, a couple of other
Auburn
things.
is famous for its prison, and it's famous for the first place in America for the electric chair. Beautiful, beautiful fall colours, by the way. Let's throw up a few pictures of fall colours there.
Beautiful fall colours.
No, apparently it wasn't even the most beautiful fall colours. We were very lucky. We were there screening My Son Hunter with the Cuddys, the Cuddy family, who basically are the county historians.
Oh my God,
Great
fabulous.
team, great screening. It's our favourite place to screen our movies, actually, I think. And I'm actually looking back through our back catalogue thinking, we could go back there and show this
That's
movie,
right,
that
yeah.
movie.
Excuses to go back to Auburn,
Yes.
New York. But after Auburn, New York, we then went to New York City and we had a wonderful screening at the Metropolitan Republican Club. Packed house, by the way, stuffed to the rafters. Really, really nice by our friend Laura. Put that together. Really, really,
And
really
Ian
great.
Walsh Riley as well.
Fantastic.
And so, yeah.
And then after that, we went
went
to Washington, D.C., and that's going to come up
Yes.
in our teasers film. So tell us what else is happening.
So if the teasers are allowed, what was that?
I don't know, Phil. It was the intro to the teasers.
Okay. Thank you. So, what's on the show today? Paul Pelosi. It's the media, stupid. It's all about the media. So we let you know what you need to know, or what you need to be, the questions you need to be asking, and why. No, you're not crazy for thinking this is crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And talking about media malfeasance, the New York Times did a whole story on fake Indians. But guess which fake Indians they didn't include? Yeah.
Why were they? Oh yeah, we're going to get to that.
Yeah, there was a fake Indian story in Canada, apparently, and they decided
To do a whole story on fake Indians and forget a rather famous fake Indian.
and another recent famous
And another very recent fake Indian that
Yes.
you talked about last
Yes.
week, Phelan.
Big Heap Trouble.
Mm-hmm.
Not. So if you're ever in DC and need a cleanse to get the swamp out of your system, we have the perfect antidote for you, and it all starts in a church where the son of Justice Antonin Scalia is the priest. So the son of Antonin Scalia is the priest.
That we quite accidentally, a friend of ours invited us to this mass on Sunday, and actually, what a gift. We're going to come to that.
Yes.
And we have an interview that we're going to be doing later with
Comedian Lou Perez. He tells us about the death of comedy and how he says it's now reborn. The comedy killed it, but it also helped it rebirth. I wonder. Let's see how that interview goes. Okay. And call Jane if you want a movie that whitewashes abortion. We have the truth about the Call Jane Collective for you, and it's not what Sigourney Weaver tells you in the movie, and it's not what the New York Times tells you, but it is very, very telling about abortion.
And before we get started with the show, I just wanted to mention our dear friend John Harpole, who wrote earlier actually and had been listening to our podcast that we had, brilliant interview we had last week with Robert Bryce, and John was on his way out to see his kid who's in college, and he said he was in Kansas, drove 67 miles through a 67-mile wind farm, basically, that went on for
Wow.
67 miles. And he can report directly from Kansas that not one of the windmills on the 67 miles was moving. So
I think we call that a wind drought.
yes, and John was sort of saying how extraordinary for him to be on this trip and just to see this and be able to tell us. And at the time, he was listening to Robert and myself and Phelim talking about wind droughts. And, you know, wind droughts happen, and it seems to be something, obviously, that is not factored in by the people who are so hell-bent on net zero without having thought through what it means if you're going to have weather dependent, which is the new phrase now to remember, weather dependent energy. And if you're going to have weather dependent energy, you should have factored in the fact that the wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine. Tell us about Paul Pelosi film. This has been obviously dominating the Twitterverse, certainly, which obviously
Yes.
I'm very into the Twitterverse. And
Elonverse.
And by the way, anyone wanting to have some fun, John Nolte has been fabulous on Twitter about this. With obviously, there's a lot of wild theories going around, but it is a wildly strange story film. Can you fill us in?
Well, you see, it's a wildly strange story, but in some respects, if you look at democratic cities like San Francisco, like LA, it's not unusual to be attacked by crazy people in your home at 2 a.m. in blue cities nowadays. And look, who wouldn't want to have a conspiracy theory about Paul Pelosi? And maybe it's true, you know, but the media are doing two things. They are not treating this the way they would treat it if this was a Republican found in his underwear with the other guy in his underwear at 2 a.m. Whilst his wife is out of town, let's say, right? This is being treated like it was a burglary, nothing to see here. And we're not going to ask for the body cameras. We're not going to ask for the affidavits. We're not going to ask for the arrest report. We're not even going to investigate the guy's criminal record. We're not going to publish the guy's criminal record. I mean, you see on Twitter that the guy was a male prostitute. Listen, I haven't seen any documentation backing that up, so I would treat that with a pinch of salt. And the people who are posting it have not posted any documentation about this. So the problem is the media, and then you have people like Politico. Now, these are two separate Politico articles. David DePape, which is the person,
the suspect,
the alleged attacker, forced his way into the home through a back entrance. Scott said officers arrived at the house, knocked on the front door, and were let inside by an unknown person. They discovered DePape and Pelosi struggling for a hammer, and after they instructed him to do a drop.
Instructed them to drop the weapon. Scott said DePape took the hammer and violently attacked Pelosi.
Right. So Scott is the police spokesperson for the San Francisco Police Department. So yeah, they were let inside by an unknown person. Then several days later, the Politico ran this article. Beyond Trump Jr. and Higgins, pro-Trump commentators from Charlie Kirk to former Milwaukee County Sheriff David Clark Jr. also weighed in online to raise questions about the investigation based on unfounded and false claims. Among the baseless claims were that a third person answered the door when police arrived at the Pelosi home, which San Francisco law enforcement has said is untrue.
Wow. But Politico did report at the time.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
Politico guilty of baseless claims.
Well,
reporting baseless
or
claims.
the police made a mistake, right? But you don't say that someone reporting what the police said is a baseless claim. You say in that article they should say police said this, we reported it, but now they've pulled back on it. So instead of telling people who reported that and people who listen to them that they're a conspiracy theorist or false or baseless claims. So we are at the stage now that's a classic gaslighting there.
Yes.
So
yeah.
and the media need to do their job, and I suppose this is good.
Yeah,
this is the new way of doing it. Don't investigate. So allow
baseless claims.
Allow conspiracy theories to arise, and then you can attack the people putting them around because and that fills your agenda, but it avoids you having to ask awkward questions. Look, there are awkward questions.
Do your
to be
job.
asked,
Yeah,
but by the way,
just do your job.
It could actually be as simple as, and it's actually a political point as well, that when you allow people to camp on the streets, tens of thousands of them, when you allow open air drug markets, when you don't put criminals in prison, when you have no cash bail, and you are going to get people coming into your house at 2 a.m. with hammers. That could be as simple as that, or it could be, a Paul Pelosi is involved in some, extracurricular activities. I don't know the answer to that, but the media should be leaking police reports, should be leaking. Where's the court cases now demanding the body cam? There's 2 weeks before an election, right? If this guy is a MAGA guy and he's reciting Trump's speeches as he's hammering Paul Pelosi over the head,
not
we
to
need
laugh.
to see that.
Yes.
So, or if he's rambling and talking about chemtrails, we need to see that as well. Or if he's rambling and talking about Black Lives Matter, because apparently at his house there's a Black Lives Matter flag.
But I think the point you're making basically is that the journalists should do their journalism without bias, without prejudice. They should just be ruthless. They should be equal opportunities ruthless investigators, and they don't seem to be, as you say, right?
Yes.
But moving right along,
yes,
to something. Yeah, from the kind of awful to the sublime. Actually, this was moving into the sublime.
So we were in
Washington D.C.
at the weekend, and a friend invited us to mass in his local church, and we went there. And Father Scalia, what's Father Scalia's first name, by the way?
Oh, we're going to have to look that up. So Father Scalia's first name, who is Antonin, the late Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia's son, is the priest in this parish. Our friend brought us there. And he gave the most wonderful sermon, the most extraordinary sermon. And I think before I get into that, I think Phelan wanted to tell. Oh no, you're not.
I do want to tell a little story actually.
Or maybe tell that at the
why
end.
Is my computer messing up? Anyway, Father Scalia. It's Father Paul D. Scalia,
Okay.
and it was St. James's Catholic Church, and he puts his sermons or his homilies
So
online.
we'll give you the link to listen to the whole of this sermon. It's an audio. There's no video to go with it, but we are going to listen to a few pieces from it, and I'm going to talk through what Father Scalia said. It was really amazing. But but you had a little.
My friend Boris is a composer. Is a composer. Works in other fields now at the moment. But he actually was at an event where he met Antonin Scalia, the originalist. So Antonin Scalia and Clarence Thomas are the originalists on the originalists on the Supreme Court, in that they go back to what the
founding
fathers meant
by what they were writing,
the Constitution, and try and apply that today. And Antonin Scalia met Boris and said, "Boris, what are you doing?" Boris said, "I'm a composer. I write music for films." And he goes, "That must be very difficult. How do you do that?" And Boris looks him straight in the eye and goes, "Well, I take the movie and I try and work out the creator's original intention." Well, Antonin Scalia I think he almost had a heart attack. He was laughing so much. He found it to be the funniest thing. So I had great fun telling his son about that. So the mass was amazing. The homily was amazing. Let's talk about that.
Yeah. So I suppose the subject of the homily was a public faith or no faith at all. And again, we're going to put the link to this up in the show notes, because it's really worth listening to the whole thing. As I said, it's not video, it's audio. So we're going to listen to a few pieces of this. But basically, he was basing, his starting point was the story of Zacchaeus, who was this very wealthy guy, tax collector, up to no good, apparently, illegal activity and all of this, but very wealthy and all of that. And that Jesus was coming to the village, basically. And he makes the point as well, Father Scalia made the point that Luke's gospel is the only gospel that mentions this story. And he just thinks that Luke was great at finding these gems. He said he was a great, like he was a jeweler or something. I think he had a very good, you listen to the whole thing, it's really fabulous. But basically he
had a comedic, he found the funny things in it,
So Zacchaeus was really short, and he saw that, heard that Jesus was coming and whatever, and there was a massive crowd around. So he went running, and as Father Scalia said, people didn't really run at that time. There wasn't like a lot of joggers around. So here he is running like with his vestments, with this guy who was very wealthy and all of that, and he can't, and he's jumping up and down because he wants to try and see Jesus and he can't, whatever. So anyway, he gets up a tree, and then he goes out on the branch of a tree, and as a friend of Father Scalia's said, he was up a tree, out a branch, but standing firm.
No, up a tree, out on a limb, but stood his ground.
But stood his ground. That's it. Exactly. And I want to start by playing this first little tiny part for you, because basically the first kind of idea was that the public nature of faith. So the contrast that the priest was setting up was between Zacchaeus and Nicodemus. Nicodemus had faith, but kind of did everything in private and secret.
Came to Jesus at night.
Yeah, and was very secretive and all that. And basically, he's making the point. Father Scalia is making the point: a public faith or no faith at all. Let's listen to this first section where he talks about that.
What's conspicuous in this gospel about Zacchaeus is the public nature of his faith. The Gospels tell us about another man, Nicodemus, who was devoted to Christ, but only privately. He came to Jesus at night under cover of darkness. He was afraid to be publicly devoted to our Lord. Zacchaeus is very public about it, both in action and in word. And that public witness is an essential aspect of faith. Not that every single one of us has to make a spectacle of ourselves, not that every single one of us has to get up on a soapbox and start haranguing passersby, but it does mean that we cannot believe one thing privately and another thing publicly. We can't say one thing on Sundays and then act or speak in another way the rest of the week. This is a matter of integrity. It's also a matter of just witness to Christ. The Christian faith is a public faith, or it is no faith. We have to bear witness to it, or we will soon lose it.
So yeah, that Catholics, there's a temptation among Catholics to keep things private and not rock the boat. The next little section, and I really do think it's not the whole sermon, by the way, is 12 minutes, so it's well worth listening.
Only 12 minutes.
Yeah, the whole. I know,
Wow.
I know. It's amazing what he fills into 3. I know that. I know. It's
I don't
amazing.
believe you.
When I went back and listened to it, I was thinking, my God, I can't believe it's only 12 minutes because it's so packed full. The next section
Well, that's amazing.
that he talks
Can
about.
I just say that's amazing because I felt it's like I said to you after, how long do you think it took him to write that? Because it's like a newspaper column. It's a speech. You know, that's like a speech that you would give. And I know how much time you spend preparing your speeches. And I was like, how much time? But like it's only 12 minutes. I mean, a lot in there. Go ahead.
So basically, he said, he makes the point that there's often an objection that, that faith and politics need to be separated, that they always need to be kept separate. And he corrects the record on that, and it is powerful. Have a listen to this. It's just about 2 minutes long, and let's just listen to that. Extraordinary.
And there's always the objection that faith and politics should be kept completely separate. That's the Nicodemus solution. And we know it's wrong. And the reason we know it's wrong is because we know that in other ages, Catholics failed to do what they should have done, failed to speak out publicly, and they're rightly faulted for that. Some Catholics condemned slavery, but not enough did. Some Catholics in Germany opposed Hitler, but not enough did. So we know that our faith should prompt us to a public witness. And the clearest example in this regard, as stated time and time again by our bishops, is the protection of the unborn, which is not just one issue among many. There are many life issues, but this one is different. First of all, because it's clearly the destruction of the most defenseless human life, and at a number that dwarfs any other assault on life in our culture. And also, as a matter of principle as well, because the child in the womb represents really the family, the fundamental cell of society. So to approve the taking of this life, not to mention to work for its legalization, promotion, and even funding, is to assault the foundation of society. And I feel the need to speak on this because the most powerful man in our nation, the President of the United States, publicly claims two profoundly contradictory things: the Catholic faith on one hand, and the legalization, protection, promotion, and funding of abortion on the other. These two things can't go together. That political stance that he has is contrary to the Catholic faith, and we need to be clear about that.
And as he's setting it up there, obviously, as you can hear, it's particularly prescient because this, as he said, we're coming into that, it's been this period of time where people have thought about abortion. And as he said, there's an election coming up. And I just thought it was extraordinary where he actually ended up going. And I mean, obviously, he's not endorsing candidates because they're not allowed to do that. But he's basically saying, as a Catholic, you need to be voting every time if you are a Catholic based on faith. And on the life issue, he makes that really great point where the life issue supersedes all of that because you don't need to be a Catholic to care about this. You don't need to be religious at all to care about this. And that, in fact, that an attack on the preborn is actually an attack on the family, and that should matter to all of us, And I think the last little piece I want to play is basically that Father Scalia, also makes the point that he knows a bit about abortion because he has counselled so many women who have been hurt by abortion. Let's just hear a little bit of that. That's just about a minute long.
And another reason to speak on this uncomfortable topic is because I, as a priest, have, in the 26 years of my priesthood, met and counseled many women who've made that unfortunate choice. And so I know from them the wounds that it inflicts on individuals and on relationships and on society. I know the lie that this is a path to freedom because I've seen the slavery and the pain that it has produced.
Yeah, so we got very lucky. It was kind of amazing, because we're sort of sitting there. It was the whole Mass was gorgeous, by the way, anyway, very beautifully done, and with elements of the Latin Mass in it. And I have to say, my father used to talk about the Latin Mass, and I don't know, we didn't really pay attention to him, and I think the Latin Mass had gone by the time we were growing up. But honestly, if you ever get a chance to go to a Latin Mass, it's kind of on a different level. But they had elements of the Latin Mass in this. In this Catholic sermon, like they had many of the parishioners were reciting prayers in the Latin, but it was just, and I mean, we felt we just got lucky. Actually, it was just an extraordinary Mass to have been at, and as I said, listen to the whole sermon. It's definitely worth it. Right, Phelim, what were you going to tell us next then?
Well, there's an article in the New York Times about fake Indians.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
There's lots and lots of examples of people pretending to be black, pretending to be Native American, pretending to be, a minority. And if the idea is that being a minority, being black, being Indian or whatever, that any of those things is a disadvantage, why would you pretend to be that which you are not? Because obviously there's some kind of an advantage in it. And the people who have done it have definitely done very well out of it.
The headline on the New York Times is "Doubts over Indigenous Identity in Academia Spark Pretendian Claims," and it's kind of
Pretendian,
and they call it their Canada letter. But like, if you're the New York Times, right, and you're talking about Pretendians, right, and it starts off with a number of really good stories about fake Indians in Canada who invent their native heritage to, I suppose,
to further their career,
and their status. But wouldn't you then say, they talk about this is a growing thing, but wouldn't you mention the most obvious fake Indian of them all, Elizabeth Warren, the great progressive? And then wouldn't you mention Sashim Littlefeather, who we talked about last week, who was chosen by Marlon Brando to go and
accept his award or reject his award.
Reject his award on behalf of Native Americans, and she turned out to be a fake Indian as well. So it's this idea, this failure to call Elizabeth Warren out on this. It's a complete disgrace of journalism. It's a complete disgrace of the culture. If you listen to the Supreme Court case on affirmative action on Monday, there, Alito asked, so what happens if someone, ticks a box and claims to be Native American?
Who is not?
How does that affect the affirmative action, right? And of course the answer was, well, that would be dishonest. And, but he was obviously having a dig at Elizabeth Warren. Yes. And Sotomayor jumped in and changed the subject before you can say, heap big trouble. Boom, boom.
That's very good, Phelim.
Yes.
Heap big trouble.
Anyway, this is more examples of media malfeasance where they're trying to memory hole the truth that Elizabeth Warren faked her Native American heritage so that Harvard would employ her because then they can claim to have a woman of colour in their law faculty. She was the first, Elizabeth Warren, let's put up a picture of Elizabeth Warren there. She was the first woman of colour in the Harvard Law.
When we talk about people, the Pretendians, I love that word now. That's going to be my new word, Pretendians. I just saw a headline the other day, and I can't find it right now, but it was somebody who was speaking on behalf of the BLM movement, you know, and they were going to do a speech, and I'm almost sure that it was a remote speech, and the price tag was $40,000. So you can see how you'd want to become a Pretendian. Actually, you could see how that would be a rather attractive thing, you know.
Would be.
And you remember before we talked about the very famous African American guy who's basically making a whole career
Sean
of the
King, Talcum X?
No, the Donner. He has some kind of. I'm trying to think of his name. The guy who's written that famous book that now is in every school in America.
Kendi,
That's him, Exum Kendi. And we remember famously on this podcast talking about him before, where he does a lot of these remote speeches, and that he gave a remote speech, I think he gave a remote speech to Wisconsin, charged them a huge amount of money, and then insisted in his contract it was absolutely essential that they deleted the file, that they weren't allowed to record it. And you would think, by the way, that anyone who cared about these issues, who really wanted, you know, an end to discrimination or the endemic racism that this country is.
It's a public health crisis.
The public health crisis of endemic racism, that you'd really want that speech to be everywhere. But apparently not, because really the priority is yum, 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 yum. Give me $30 and I'm going to keep on, or $30,000 or $40,000, and I'm going to keep on yum, 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 doing that speech all over the place. Yeah, don't record me, whatever you do. Anyway, Pretendians. Moving on, Philip.
Yes, so talking of comedic...
Oh, yeah, segue. I'm not sure that was a great segue. Go on ahead.
I did an interview earlier with Lou Perez. I actually heard him speak at a book launch, a little book party in Manhattan, in a penthouse in Manhattan.
Look at you,
nice.
Philip. You're so trendy and so cool. Meanwhile, I was at the New York Athletic Club with a friend.
Yes. Not eating food.
That was a problem. I made a mistake.
Drinking cocktails.
Yes. We had a good conversation, though.
Yes. So, I met this guy, Lou Perez. He was launching this book. He's the head writer and producer of We the Internet TV and has the Lou Perez podcast. But I heard about his new book. The book is called That Joke Isn't Funny Anymore, on the death and rebirth of comedy. I spoke to him earlier. Let's go over to that interview now. As I was saying, I'm joined now by Lou Perez, who has had a storied comedy career. He was the head writer and producer at the Webby award-winning comedy We the Internet TV, and has produced sketch comedy for many, many years. As you will find out from the book, he's written for the Wall Street Journal. He writes for Spiked Online. He's the host of the Lou Perez podcast, and he was also an alumnus of the Upright Citizens Brigade, which we're going to talk about, which I was pretty shocked when I saw that story in it, actually, and the end of it. So I want to ask about that. But first of all, Lou, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
As I was saying earlier, I saw you at a book launch in Manhattan, a book party. What would you call that? A book party, a book launch, a private party?
Yeah, but whatever makes it sound the most exclusive.
I know it. It was a literary salon.
Salon, exactly. Yeah, there were philosophers and revolutionaries and, you know, everything under the sun. Champagne, maybe.
And Costco charcuterie, you know.
Yes.
I can't imagine how they had all those literary salons in the 30s without Costco. It just doesn't make sense. So you were talking about your book, and you know, the book is called That Joke Isn't Funny Anymore, on the death and rebirth of comedy, and there's the cover of it. And for people of a certain age, they'll recognize that line as from the Smiths.
That's right.
Which I don't think the Smiths feature in the book at all. Do they? Do you mention the Smiths at all?
I don't think I do.
Yes. Okay.
So
the reference just comes and goes then. Okay.
Right. Well, one of the things that I found out when I wrote the book and it finally came time to publish it is that apparently it's really expensive to use lyrics in the book. So I had to. So I was, I opened up with a couple of quotes. One from Michel de Montaigne, which I think that's how you pronounce it. And then I wanted to use the lyrics from That Joke Isn't Funny Anymore, which are just so perfect.
Yes,
they're too close to home and too near the bone, too close to home, too near the bone.
Yeah.
And apparently we couldn't do it because I don't know, copyright issues or something like that. So I'm really hoping that I don't get sued by Morrissey, who is a musical god to me. Although
Yes.
if I am going to get sued by someone, I mean, that would be a pretty amazing.
I'd crowdfund that. I'd crowdfund that legal defense, and and you could quote Morrissey lyrics from The Stand in defense of your artistry. I mean, just to talk about that song. I mean, my memory of that song is that Morrissey was probably poking gentle fun at himself. At the character. That joke isn't funny anymore. Morrissey's trying to say to himself, "Get over yourself" in some respects, and that's a kind of a segue into the book, and I was very taken with the beginning of the book where you talk about people who asked in all seriousness, what is the role of comedy under Trump? And you say same as it always, or the answer is same as it always was, surely, but that's not how a lot of comedians saw the role of comedy under Trump, or indeed the role of comedy under Obama.
Yeah, it was rather shocking to read think pieces like that and see that be part of the conversation. This idea that what was implied is that comedy needed to be different now under a Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And you ask that question, why would it need to be different than it was under all the other administrations? And I think a big part of that was Trump was viewed as an existential threat. And when you're dealing with someone who I believe Sam Harris recently likened him to a meteor coming to crash, and destroy Earth. When you're likening somebody to that, you have to use any weapon that you have to defeat him. And when you're a comedian and your only weapon that you have, the only artillery you have are punchlines, well, I guess you need to aim your punchlines at this big orange target.
Actually, and it's very interesting you use that phrase about punchlines, because then you go on to make the point about the opening of Saturday Night Live after Trump was elected. And it is Cecily, what's her name? Cecily
Strong.
Cecily Strong in a Hillary-style impression,
no, sorry, that was Kate McKinnon.
Kate McKinnon. You're correct. You're correct. And I remember watching it. Kate McKinnon at a piano singing "Alleluia" in full Hillary regalia, and it's kind of this mournful song about the end of Hillary and the end of Leonard Cohen. And as you point out in the book, it's a joke without a punchline. There is no punchline to the joke. The song ends, and I think she says something. Are you going to keep fighting? I am, or something like that. It's a joke it's Saturday Night Live and open with no punchline. Death of comedy? I think so.
Yeah, every single time that I think about that moment, I almost can't believe that it actually happened. And I think, looking back on it, here you have a comedy establishment. Saturday Night Live has been around for decades and decades. It's had such an incredible influence on the culture, not only with comedy, but so much surrounding it. And then to see that happen, and you wonder how that even got through. Was everybody on board? Because I don't remember reading anything about, there was at least one writer who stood up and said, "Hey, you know what? Maybe this isn't the way to open things here on our comedy show." And it had almost like a more just sad, moribund sort of vibe to it than even post 9/11.
Yes.
It was almost like, post 9/11, I think the question was, are we ready to laugh again? And SNL and other comedians at the time were saying, yes, we are ready to laugh, as a way of sort of defeat, this, these barbarians who, attacked us. And, but this one, it was almost like, even sadly, like, are you ready to fight? I'm ready to fight. Oh, man.
But I'm not going to fight with my humor, which is the only weapon I have. I mean, as I remember the 9/11 opening, it was, can we be funny again? And Rudy Giuliani said, were you ever? Right. So they made a joke about, can we be funny again? So but this was so so we're talking about the death of comedy, and then there's this idea that jokes about Trump were bringing truth to power, which is a ludicrous concept.
I felt like that there was a time where we started hearing a lot about comedy needing to speak truth to power, truth
Yeah.
to power, truth to power, and it got me wondering, when did things change from just speaking the truth?
Yes.
And it seems like one of the things about the truth is that it could be a messy business. That
Yes.
sometimes when you're speaking the truth, you're going to be calling out people who are protected for one reason or another, or ideas that have been given sort of a gospel, that are treated now as gospel. And then so what happens is if you have that power component to it, then you're in a way protected
Yeah.
to lob all of your criticisms and jokes against these respected targets.
It's kind of my background is journalism, and it kind of reminds me of this idea of journalism is about afflicting the comfortable and comforting the afflicted, right? Which sounds great, but actually it's complete nonsense, right? Because sometimes the comfortable are the greatest people on the planet and do more for the planet than any afflicted person ever had, and sometimes the afflicted are complete assholes,
Yeah.
right? And criminals and terrible people. And so, should journalism not be about afflicting these people? Should it not be should it not be about telling the truth about these people, even though they're afflicted? So, and I remember in the book you talk about you were at a comedy show and there's a black female comic, and and this is a great example, I thought, of how she lost the opportunity to make great jokes. She said, I went to my therapist, who was a white therapist, and I said, "Did you vote for Trump?" And the therapist said no, and she got a round of applause, and everyone felt comfortable. But you made the point; she missed a brilliant comic opportunity there.
Yeah, when I saw her, this happens quite a bit. When you're in the audience at a show and you're about to go up, and then a comedian is up before you, and you're like, oh man, I wish I had that. I wish I had that bit. I wish I could do that. And yeah, like you said, I thought she missed an incredible opportunity to, imagine being a black woman and you have a white therapist who has voted for Trump.
Mm-hmm.
And you insist on continuing to see this Trump supporting MAGA therapist. Just think of all the comedic possibilities you could have there, because I mean, just from from a basic standpoint, if your therapist is honest enough with you to admit that she voted for Trump, then she's going to be honest with you about all sorts of things in your life that
Yes.
maybe you don't want to that you don't want to confront yourself. And I felt like yeah, it was right there. It was right there for the taking. And unfortunately, the comedian didn't take that opportunity. Although, who knows? Maybe she reads the book and she's like, "Oh, maybe I'll change things up a bit next time I'm on stage."
At one stage, you were named as part of a far right echo chamber. How was that, and how successful have you been at radicalizing young people all across the world?
Yeah. So what kicked off this whole book was at the end of 2020. There was a pre-published academic paper talking about the growth of right-wing echo chambers on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a number of friends of mine who shared with me this study. And if you go all the way to the back of the study, there's an index where they classify all these different YouTube channels as
Mm-hmm.
far left, left, moderate, right wing, and far right wing.
Yes.
And when you go to when you went to the far right wing, my comedy channel, We the Internet TV, was listed, which
Mm-hmm.
was very surprising. For one, I was surprised that academics were being paid so much money to analyze YouTube. But then, secondly, the fact that my channel was listed as under the far right, but I was in good company. I was joined by the Joe Rogan Experience,
Mm-hmm.
Sam Harris, Brett Weinstein was in there
Mm-hmm.
as well. So clearly, people who have no relationship whatsoever to the far right. And a friend of mine said, you should write a response or do a video or something like that. And at first, I was like, whatever, who cares? But at the time, I had just lost my job, and I was going to be looking for new gigs. And then I
Mm-hmm.
started thinking, like, here I am putting together my resume, and if
Yes.
all people see is this label of far
Far
right,
right.
and think I'm like, wearing khaki pants and carrying a tiki torch,
Yes.
it's probably not a good look for entertainment. So I ended up writing a response that ran in the Wall Street Journal,
Yes.
and from there, that kind of kicked off this whole book.
I just want to come towards the end of the book now before going back to other parts of the book. But it really shocked me when I read this about the Upright Citizens Brigade. I mean, tell that story, and did I get it right that they closed over this, or don't spoil the ending? But tell us about the Upright Citizens Brigade, your involvement, how much it meant to you, what happened, and what the outcome was.
Yeah, so I was very lucky to start my comedy career New York University as an undergrad, and then my senior year, we sort of graduated to the stage of the Upright Citizens Brigade Theater, which was a improv comedy and sketch comedy theater and school.
Yes.
If you're in New York and you've taken improv classes, chances are you've taken a UCB class.
Even I in Ireland, I think I'd heard of the Upright Citizens Brigade. I mean, it's an international brand. It was known as probably a feeder for great comedians to other shows, etc. So I just want to. I mean, it's a major comic institution.
Yeah, if people, it's kind of like what National Lampoon was to
Mm-hmm.
comedy. I think in the 70s, 80s, and 90s,
Mm-hmm.
National Lampoon and Second City, the Upright Citizens Brigade Theater was that for the
Yeah.
2000s. There's just so much comedic influence there, and so that's where I really got my start doing sketch comedy in particular, and and I say as one, I was so lucky to come up at that time because you really had no idea what was going to be happening on that stage. There were just so many incredible comedic voices happening, and then also batshit crazy people who would be
Yes.
willing to get up on stage and do wild stuff. And so it was a theater. It was a place of experimentation. It was a place of, you would be able to get to work out your stuff in front of a live theater, and
Mm-hmm.
it's not like you were paid to do it either. Some people they would intern and be able to take free classes and
Mm-hmm.
that sort of thing. But every time we took the stage, it's not like we were getting a cut of the ticket sales. But with that trade off was, well, you're going to be performing with some of the best comedians around, and you're going to be able to work on your craft. And
Mm-hmm.
from there, we sort of graduated to making YouTube videos and that sort of thing. And sort of my focus kind of went to production. And then something I noticed over the past, say 5 to 7 years, was I started seeing all this press about the UCB theater basically being uh, an example of institutional racism and white supremacy and all that. And I was thinking, this is an improv theater.
Yes.
What are you talking about? Even with the with the charges
Mm-hmm.
that were floating around, like this is an improv theater, and uh, so as I went back and started writing about it for the book, I was able to sort of relive so much of what I loved about the place, and then also get so much bitter. I was able to sort of re-experience a lot of bitterness by seeing its good name dragged through the mud by people who were accusing it of things that it just isn't. So
Yeah, and I think you say there like the improv is kind of is doesn't have a huge black following, or it's just one of those things, and you know also like I assume that the Upright Citizens Brigade is full of liberals.
oh yeah.
The idea that they would be somehow racist and think. I mean, of course, they think along racial lines, but they would kill themselves not being racist or not denigrating anyone for their race. But am I correct? Did it survive this scandal, or has it pretty much finished it?
There was a theater on the East Coast, and then a theater on the West Coast. Some of the brick and mortar theaters have had to shut down.
Hmm.
And then I know that classes still happen online. I'm not sure
Right.
what's going on in New York. Actually, I think there's been some companies have come in and taken over and all that. So I don't, whatever it is, it's definitely not the way that it used to be. And
Mm.
you bring up a good point. I mean, the UCB four, the people who started it, as well as well, way more than a majority of the people who perform there, are all liberals, progressives, people who really care about these issues. And you would see what they would do. They would have a lot of diversity scholarships, for
Hmm.
people to be able to take these classes, and they were doing the work, I guess, but I guess you get to a point where the work isn't enough. And what I found interesting was kind of during well, I don't know if the George Floyd unrest,
Yes.
upheaval, or whatever you
Yeah.
want to call it. I think that was sort of another example of, here you have this battle that's raging against quote unquote systemic racism and injustice and all that. And it's like, well, how do we fight it? And it's like, well, when all you have is improv, if you're an improv school or
Yes.
you're an improv performer, well, I guess if you're going to put on your militant hat and turn it onto any of the institutions that you might actually have some sway over, well, you're going to aim it against a relatively small theater.
This book's called "That Joke Isn't Funny Anymore," on the death and rebirth of comedy. It's a book about identity politics and comedy and how that has ruined comedy. We haven't got to your identity yet, which is very important. Your name is Lou Perez, so you're
That's right.
obviously from County Cork, Ireland. No, you're not. You're from Argentina, I believe. But you're the son of an immigrant,
Right.
and I say that for a reason to tell the next story. You mean your own father was concerned that by speaking out you would get blacklisted, and then you quote Ibram X Kendi, who says who has said in the past things, the horror that his daughter wanted to become a boy, or his boy wanted to become a girl, or whatever it was, which would be called transphobic. Now, I don't agree with that, but also you quote him saying that the white people basically invented HIV to kill black people. He's not cancelled. He will never be cancelled. So you came out as such, in the Wall Street Journal, and that has that affected your career? Has your father's fears become real?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. So the that line about Ibram X Kendi and the HIV, at the time he was, I believe, an undergrad at a college in Florida. I
Yeah.
believe his name was Henry Rogers at the time.
Hmm.
You guys can fact check me.
Yeah.
And he wrote. I guess he was a columnist, and every week you would be treated to articles that talk about white people inventing AIDS and that sort of thing, which I found way more enjoyable reading than his book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. I have that around here somewhere.
Yeah.
Um, so there's that. Yeah, with my father, I'm from New York. He's from Argentina, and he came here in the late 1970s. Sort of, I think,
Mm.
right around the time or right before the military junta, I guess,
Uh-huh.
took over in Argentina. And Argentine politics have always been one, upheaval,
Hmm.
and some scary times. And fortunately, I never had to deal with that because I was living in the United States. The closest I got was when I went to Los Angeles, and that's where my father would often end our phone calls by telling me just to be careful with what I said, because
Mm.
he didn't want me to be blacklisted because of the ideas that I have.
Mm.
And my dad obviously cares very much for me,
Mm.
and that there were times when I'd be on set and people would just bring up political issues that I would never bring up among strangers, because it's sort of like, well, I don't know where people
Yes.
stand. And
Yeah.
also, we're on a set. Our job here is to play pretend and to perform and, to get along enough so that we could do that. So, people talking about healthcare and immigration and bringing up the Koch brothers and stuff. It's just sort of like, well, I think this is kind of inappropriate. And, but what I found though, when it came to expressing myself, thankfully, the more open that I was with my beliefs and the way that I see the world, and also what I'm willing to joke about, the more success I've had. So if there are doors closing, or opportunities that I've lost, well, I don't know about it directly, because a big part of that is because I'm making my own opportunities. I'm making my own.
Okay. If you wanted someone to take something from, one thing from the book, what would you like? Sum up the book for people? And also, I would like to ask you, on the death and rebirth of comedy, what's the rebirth? How can we stop wokeness destroying comedy?
The book is one of hope, I think, for sure. And I think one of the ways that we're going to, bring about the rebirth of comedy, and I kind of think we are right now, is taking advantage of technology that we have. The fact that it's almost a joke that every comedian has a podcast, and it's like, yeah, every comedian does have a podcast, which means there's opportunities there for comedians to grow an audience outside of what used to be the mainstream way to do it. So I think when it comes to technology, I think that's going to be very helpful. And then also, I think building relationships between the performer and the comic. I think like no time in history, the relationships that entertainers have with their audience are closer than ever. Now, some entertainers aren't comfortable with that, and I totally understand. But the idea of you can see somebody on stage perform, and then you can listen to them talk for hours on end. I think it's really important to cultivate those relationships and to support the people out there who are doing the kind of work that you want to see more of. So I'm very hopeful when it comes to that. And then when I was writing the book, something that I was kind of finally able to take the time to look back, and I saw that what an important role comedy played for me at all different points in my life. And I think over the years, like kind of going back to that question that was asked when Trump was president, what is the role of comedy now under a President Trump? There's been, it's been so politicized, so, over intellectualized that I think a lot of people have gotten away from the real basics of laughter and joy. And since I, wrote this over the past couple of years, I wrote this during the time of a pandemic, of a plague. I also found that, comedy was a way to bring me back from some of the depths of darkness that I had gone into. And I think that it's such a powerful tool that we have. And I think if people get anything from the book, I want them to be able to get back to that, to say, not be afraid to use comedy, to allow comedy to enrich their lives and bring some light in the darkness.
Thank you.
That's maybe a little piece.
No, it's a great ambition, and I hope you have a lot of success with it. And so it's that joke isn't funny anymore. On the Death and Rebirth of Comedy by Lou Perez, and it's published by
Bombardier Books.
Bombardier Books. You can buy it on Amazon and all good bookstores. Thank you very much for coming on the show. Where can we get you on social media?
TheLouPerez.com is my website, and at TheLouPerez is my handle on most social media.
Thank you very much, and best of luck with the book. Bye. Thank you.
And of course, your wife has become a stand-up comedian, as we know.
Yes.
Let's watch a little of my last. My first appearance, which was filmed actually.
Yes. Let's watch that now.
People should share things they've learned and that could help other people. So I learned that it is a lot easier to eat sourdough bread than it is to make it. So, and just for nothing, like I'm just giving this away for free here, just so you know. So, buy the bread, yeah? At the very beginning of the pandemic, a very dear friend of ours who's kind of cool, and he comes over and he's like, Ben, Ben. You know, he's brought up in Hawaii. You know, everyone knows somebody like that. I kind of hate him, you know. But so he comes over and he brings this sourdough starter. I'm actually a bit of a cook, by the way. Katie has eaten my food, right? So I'm a bit of a cook, yeah. So he brings over this thing, which looks like, let's be honest, it looks like ejaculate in a jar. I'm going to go there. It's meant to be a comedy night, all right? He brings it over. Am I right about that? I'm right. I'm going there, right? So it comes over, and I'm like, he's very cool and everything. And I'm thinking, and actually, because I'm actually genuinely interested in cooking, like super interested in cooking, I'd prefer to cook more than like just nearly do whatever, yeah. So I'm looking at this ejaculate in a jar, and I'm thinking, and then he starts telling me how to make the sourdough bread. Put your hands up if you've done this shit. Have you made the sourdough bread? Tell the truth now. Come on now. Oh, we've got one. Yeah, it takes 3 days. The second day of the 3-day process, you don't have a life. It's worse than having a baby.
If you would like Al McElhinney to
right.
be a stand-up comedian
That's
at your
right.
next gig,
appearing at dinner parties, bar mitzvahs, Christmas, whatever. Maybe not Christmas, but you know what I mean. Any other kind of feast days. Yes.
Go for it. So I just want to end today by Call Jane. So,
yes.
Starring Sigourney
Starring
Weaver.
everyone, I think is
Elizabeth
what you meant
Banks,
to say.
Sigourney Weaver, the whole shebang. And it's about the Jane Collective, which was out of Chicago at the time of when abortions were illegal before Roe, and how a plucky band of housewives got together to provide abortions for women who needed them, allegedly. It's unwatchable, apparently. The New York Times, that's very funny, the New York Times kind of said, it's wonderful. But actually, towards the end, even they had to admit that it's basically unwatchable. And you can see that from the figures.
Wow.
So it opened, it widened. This is from Deadline Hollywood. Roadside Attractions abortion movement feature called Jane.
Abortion feature.
Didn't fare that well with 240,000 total at 1,000 theatres. That's
my God. Hang on, do that again.
It took 240,000.
240,000 in 1,000 theatres.
Yes.
Just for context, not that we want to boast or anything, but we will, because that's part of what we're all about.
Pathetic like that,
yeah,
really.
we're pathetic like that, really. Our movie, Gosnell, opened in 600 theatres, and grossed
3.2 million.
3.2 million.
Yeah.
So just to give some context,
they're on
to that.
240,000. That's $225 per theatre. That's 25 people. And by the way, that's per theatre, which means that over the weekend, it would play
Phelan,
twice.
by the way, can I just say, Phelan is not good at mental arithmetic.
No, I just want people to know that when they say per theatre, they don't mean per screening.
No. They mean I know what they mean. They mean by the building.
The building. So that would have screened twice on Friday, 2 or 3 times on Saturday, and 2 or 3 times on Sunday. And each over that weekend, they got a total of $225. Let's say an average of $10. So 25 people have seen it Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So that played to empty screens, no doubt about it.
And just understand, by the way, that if they say that they had the weekend was $250,000, it only goes downhill from there. It's very rare for a movie to get this other second life. The first opening weekend, when all the advertising has been done, when they've had all the TV slots and all that, and they've had loads of love from the mainstream media, it's when people will go. People forget after that. And obviously, it hasn't. Funny how people don't seem to want to go and see this, despite the fact that it's star-studded.
Here's the New York Times. Call Jane squeezes a lot into just 2 hours. Teetering joys, she's the one that Sigourney Weaver plays, coming into consciousness arc, gobs of family drama, a touch of thriller style intrigue as they avoid the cops' legal questions, the larger political landscape, Nixon. Both Virginia and Gwen have to explain far too much, with each delivering chunks of exposition that are clearly more for the benefit of the movie's audience than for any of the characters. Gwen, as the preeminent black member in the collective, carries an additional burden because she has to deliver a righteous lecture about race and intersectionality, a lesson that the filmmakers...
No way. Did they say that? She has to deliver...
Oh, she has
Read
to.
that slower there. She has to deliver what now?
A righteous lecture about race and intersectionality, a lesson that the filmmakers should have heeded better themselves. By the way,
Can I just go out on a limb here, Phelim, and just say that, I don't think when you're thinking like, what are we going to do this evening? I said it's Friday night. I'm tired. I've been working all week. The kids are going nuts. Whatever. Your mother's unwell. All the troubles that people have in the world, and they think I'd like to do. Read it again.
A righteous lecture about race and intersectionality.
That this is, what I really want to do this evening? I really want a righteous lecture on race and intersectionality.
From some elite black actress, by the way.
From some elite black actress. And by the way, I actually think that is exactly why the film has made $250,000. I'm actually surprised it made $250,000. Who wants that? Who wants to watch that? And particularly, and it's interesting that they talk about, and we know because we are now filming, as you know, we've made 2 movies now, so we're obviously like wildly experienced here. But I think it's very interesting. It is a challenge, by the way, in movies when you have a ton of information you want to tell, and exposition is a real bore. If somebody does a ton of exposition where they kind of explain everything, you don't want that.
That's
what you want to do is that's a documentary. What you really want to do is show it, don't tell it. But instead of that, here's what you get. You get this boring lecture because they're so woke. They feel compelled to constantly preach.
I think this means that the staff of Planned Parenthood and their families didn't go and see this movie.
Because there'd be a lot of people.
There'd be a lot of people.
Yeah, unfortunately, there'd be a lot of people.
Yes. So, and then... I love this. If the reference to race and class feel ritualistic, it's because the movie largely centres on one woman. Blah, and then I love this at the end. So should you go? So a review that's overwhelmingly positive. This is the last paragraph. So should you see Call Jane ? It's like, in other words, you shouldn't. When a review asks that, you know the answer is you shouldn't. But they go, so should you see Call Jane? You bet. Right? Oh, yeah. You bet. And it's like, nah.
Yeah, not after that review.
But anyway, I just want to add the one story that is a really good story is the story of Harvey Carman, who did the abortions for them. Dr. Harvey Carman, who turned out not to be a doctor, turned out to have a master in theatre studies from UCLA and had already done time for illegal abortions.
And if you want to know more about Harvey Carman, you can go and listen to our podcast, serialkillerpod.com, and hear more about Harvey Carman, because that's a little bit of a different context to the Call Jane and the Jane Collective.
So Gosnell was involved with the Jane Collective, Kermit Gosnell. Harvey Carman was kind of run out of, or there was a dispute among some of them said, look, what's wrong with having him? It's fine. And others said, no, we can't do that. And then they kind of ran him out of the movement and decided they would
Harvey Carman. They ran Harvey Carman because he wasn't a doctor.
Yeah, but then they decided the answer to an unqualified doctor doing abortions was that they should do the abortions themselves. But then Carman then went to Philadelphia to a certain Dr. Kermit Gosnell and did a experimental abortion on 15 women and mutilated 11 of them.
It was called the Mother's Day Massacre.
The Mother's Day
and
Massacre.
And as I said, we featured that story in the podcast that we did, the True Crime Podcast, which became the number 10 most popular true crime podcast on the planet Earth for a moment. So please do go, and if you go and listen to it, and I would suggest you do go and listen to it, serialkillerpod.com, do share it with others and do give us a rating.
And leave a review. So that's the end of the show this week.
That's kind of the end of the show this week. But yeah, we have been on the road. I know I'm very sorry there's no recipe, but let me promise you that next week I'm actually going to be making a vegan soup. And I know I make fun of vegans. Most people make fun of vegans, but I have a vegan in my life who is having an operation, and I said I would make her soup. And actually I have found a fabulous vegan recipe soup. Yes, I'll be honest, it's butternut. You see, butternut squash, you can't go wrong, really, And it's interesting that this soup, I'll tell you how it's going to be when I make it, because I haven't made it yet, but I found it online, and I'm going to make a few additions. It was a New York Times recipe, but I'm going to make a few little changes to it. But I think for the vegan in your life, this could be something that could be served on Thanksgiving. Oh, and by the way, we have the end of the Thanksgiving issue. So I have had to concede that I've just had to concede. By the way, you know what? I'm not conceding. I'm giving up. Actually, it's different. I'm giving up, but not without a sour face about that. I would really like Thanksgiving with just fish, because we obviously have pescatarians coming for Thanksgiving. But I have been told that my husband's
Let's put some
face,
context here.
My
Let's put
husband's
some-
face when I said to my husband that I actually thought that we could have just like fish, really nice fish for Thanksgiving. He behaved.
No,
he
tell
behaved
people, just
he
fish to the
behaved-
exclusion of turkey.
So he behaved basically like as though I had murdered the 2 cats right in front of his eyes. Oh, we have a cat story. We have a quick cat. Just finished with the cat story. So we came back last night very late on a flight from New York, very tired. Okay, I went to bed early. We both went to bed.
And then about 8 o'clock, whatever, I can't remember what time, but I woke up then at midnight or 1 o'clock, probably some kind of weird jet lag. I went out to the living room. We hadn't seen Scaredy Cat since we came back.
We hadn't seen Scaredy Cat.
And next thing, Scaredy Cat comes in and sort of runs past me. He runs into the little
Very
cat
dramatic.
flap. And he runs under the table. So I go in under the table to look. I thought maybe he was injured because he was kind of antisocial. And I reach in and he suddenly bolts out through the cat flap again. I'm going, that is the weirdest thing I've ever seen. And then next thing, Top Cat comes in through the cat flap. It's like he went out and told Top Cat.
He told they're home.
They're home.
Bring in
The
your
gift.
prize.
Bring in the gift. So Top Cat brought in a live rat.
Which was alive.
Yes.
I was in the bed and Top Cat went under the bed with the live rat
And
and
then
then proceeded to allow the rat have a little freedom to let him pretend to think he'd get free and then grabbed him again. I would say the end of this story is a happy ending for the rat, can I just say?
Yeah.
We have become those people, by the way. You
Well,
realise that?
listen, I wasn't of any love for the rat. So I was going like, I
But it was a small little rat, right? It wasn't a large rat.
It was a kind of a cute, as rats go, and that's carrying those words. As rats go is carrying a lot of weight there. As rats go, it wasn't the ugliest rat, the most. I've
Anyway,
ever seen.
the rat, just so you know,
So
the rat
ran
has
under
been
things,
saved.
ran under things, and then the cat would sort of get him out. But the rat was so probably wounded and terrified. He would come out, he would just sit there in front of the cat like this, and the cat would just look at him and then play with him. So when I went into the kitchen and got these kind of tongs or something like that,
Don't talk to people about using kitchen equipment, Phelim, in order to deal with the rat.
and I just reached over and grabbed the rat and had him like this again. And he went, eh. And then I took him out and dropped him over the fence. And I don't know.
The cat's alive. The cat's alive. The rat's alive. But yeah, this, it makes me look at Top Cat in a different way, just for a little while anyway, at least,
For a
He's a
moment.
killer.
For a
He's
moment.
worse than a killer, actually. He's worse than a killer. What's that called? He's a tormentor. He's a torturer.
MySonHunter.com, right? You can now buy the DVD.
Oh, yeah.
You can buy the movie and give it as a gift to someone. So it's the perfect gift for anyone.
For Thanksgiving.
Christmas, Thanksgiving.
Or mitzvah.
or you can give them a live rat.
Hanukkah. No.
Well, that's what Top gave to us. So yes. So look, don't give someone a live rat for Christmas or Thanksgiving. Give them a copy of MySonHunter.com, or MySonHunter DVD,
Which you
they'll-
can purchase at mysonhunter.com.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll see you
Bye.
the next time. Bye.